The Netherlands, May 1, 1945. The war in Europe is almost over, but in the western provinces still gripped by Nazi occupation, death arrives not with bullets, but with silence. The silence of empty markets. The silence of children too weak to cry. The silence of a nation dying of starvation. Captain James Morrison, a 26-year-old B-17 pilot from Iowa, stood in the briefing room at RAF Framlingham, staring at a map that made no sense. For 2 years, he'd flown bombing runs over Germany, watching cities burn beneath him. He'd lost friends to flak, seen fortresses spiral down in flames, and learned to sleep through the screaming nightmares. But today's orders were different. Today, they were asking him to trust the enemy. "Gentlemen," began Colonel Robert Harriman, his voice cutting through the murmur of confused aircrew, "what I'm about to tell you sounds impossible. Hell, it sounds insane. But it might be the most important mission any of you will ever fly." The room fell silent. Morrison exchanged glances with his co-pilot, Lieutenant Dave Sullivan, a wisecracking New Yorker who'd stopped joking 3 missions ago. The situation was desperate. The Dutch hunger winter, they called it. German forces, bitter and vengeful after the failed Operation Market Garden, had imposed a brutal blockade on Western Holland. Railways destroyed, roads closed, canals frozen. By winter's end, civilians were eating tulip bulbs, sugar beets, and anything else that wouldn't kill them immediately. Over 20,000 had already starved to death. Another 4 million teetered on the edge. Intelligence estimates they have maybe 2 weeks, Harriman continued, his finger tracing the occupied zone on the map. After that, we're looking at mass death on a scale we haven't seen outside the concentration camps. Morrison felt his stomach turn. He'd seen photographs smuggled out by the Dutch resistance, skeletal children, corpses piled in streets, families too weak to bury their dead. But here was the impossible part. The Allies had negotiated a temporary truce with the German forces still occupying Holland. SS General Hans Albin Rauter, a man responsible for executing thousands of Dutch civilians, had agreed to hold his fire. In exchange, American and British bombers would drop food supplies over designated zones. No weapons, no bombs, just mercy. "You'll fly unarmed," Harriman said, and the room erupted. "Sir, you're asking us to trust the SS?" shouted a bombardier. "The same bastards who shot prisoners at Malmedy, who massacred civilians across France." Morrison's jaw tightened. He remembered the stories, the bodies, the rumors that some units no longer took German prisoners. Harriman raised his hand. "I know what I'm asking. Command knows what we're asking. But if we don't do this, 4 million people die. And they're not soldiers. They're grandmothers, kids, teachers, people we've been fighting to save for 5 years." Morrison looked down at his hands, calloused from gripping control yokes through flak storms. He thought of his own grandmother back in Iowa, who'd fled Amsterdam as a girl. He thought of the hatred he'd carried for so long, the rage that fueled every bombing run, every German city reduced to rubble. And now they were asking him to set it aside. To fly defenseless into enemy guns, carrying bread instead of death. Sullivan leaned close. "What do you think, Skipper?" Morrison exhaled slowly. "I think if we don't do this, we're no better than them." The airfield buzzed with tension as Morrison's crew prepared their B-17, nicknamed Prairie Angel. Normally, the belly would be loaded with 500-pound bombs. Today, it carried sacks of flour, canned meat, chocolate bars, and powdered milk. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. For years, this plane had rained destruction. Now it would rain hope. But not everyone believed it would work. Sergeant Bill Kowalski, the tail gunner from Chicago, slammed a food crate down harder than necessary. "This is suicide, Cap. The Krauts are going to light us up the second we cross the line." Morrison didn't have an answer for that because Kowalski might be right. The plan was audacious to the point of madness. B-17s would fly at 400 feet, barely above the rooftops, slow enough for Dutch civilians to see the markings, low enough to drop supplies accurately. Flying that low, that slow, they'd be sitting ducks. One trigger-happy SS officer, one anti-aircraft battery that didn't get the memo, and dozens of bombers could fall from the sky. Lieutenant Sullivan pulled Morrison aside near the wing. "Jim, you don't have to prove anything. Nobody would blame us for sitting this one out." Morrison shook his head. "I've been dropping bombs on these people's country for 2 years, Dave. Cities they lived in, roads they walked on. Maybe this is a chance to give something back instead of just taking." At 0600 hours, the briefing revealed the designated drop zones: Duindijk Racecourse near The Hague, Valkenburg Airfield, and parks throughout Rotterdam and Leiden. The routes were carefully plotted to avoid active combat zones, following corridors the Germans had promised to leave undefended. Promised. That word hung heavy in Morrison's mind. The intelligence officer, a bookish captain named Weiss, tried to sound confident. "German High Command has guaranteed safe passage. They know the war's over. They don't want to be tried for massacring aid crews." But a pilot in the back row muttered what everyone was thinking. Since when do we trust Nazi guarantees? Morrison watched his crew work in tense silence. Radio operator Tommy Chen checked and rechecked frequencies. Navigator Harry Goldstein triple verified the routes. These men had survived Berlin, Hamburg, and Munich together. They'd trusted each other with their lives dozens of times. But now they were being asked to trust men who'd spent years trying to kill them. As the sun climbed higher, the first wave of aircraft began taxiing. Morrison climbed into the cockpit, the familiar smell of fuel and oil mixing with something new, cinnamon and coffee from the cargo hold. He ran through pre-flight checks mechanically, but his mind was elsewhere. What if this was a trap? What if SS commanders saw this as one last chance to bloody the Allies before surrender? Sullivan settled into the co-pilot seat. "You remember what Harriman said? The world will judge us not by how we destroyed our enemies, but by how we saved their victims." Morrison nodded slowly. "Yeah, I just hope the world gets a chance to judge us instead of burying us." The control tower crackled to life. "Prairie Angel, you're cleared for takeoff. Godspeed, gentlemen." Morrison pushed the throttles forward, feeling the fortress lumber down the runway. As they climbed into the gray English sky, he could see dozens of other B-17s falling into formation, each one carrying hope instead of death. Each crew making the same impossible choice, to trust mercy over vengeance, to risk everything for people they'd never met. Below, England slipped away. Ahead lay the North Sea, occupied Holland, and 4 million people who didn't know salvation was coming. The formation crossed the Dutch coast at 0843 hours. Morrison's hands were steady on the controls, but his heart hammered against his ribs. This was wrong. Every instinct screamed at him that flying this low, this slow, this defenseless into enemy territory violated every rule of survival he'd learned. "Descending to 400 feet, Sullivan called out, voice tight. The altimeter unwound as Prairie Angel dropped from the relative safety of altitude into the killing zone. At this height, even rifle fire could bring them down. Morrison could see individual buildings now, shattered windows, bomb craters from previous raids, streets empty of life. "Jesus Christ," whispered Chen from the radio position. "Look at them." Through breaks in the clouds, Morrison saw them. People. Thousands of them, emerging from buildings like ghosts. Skeletal figures in tattered clothing, faces upturned toward the sky. Some waved, some just stood, too weak or too stunned to move. The first drop zone appeared, Duindijk Racecourse. Morrison's throat tightened. This was it, the moment they'd either be proven right or shot out of the sky. "Bombardier, you ready?" Kowalski's voice crackled back. "All business now." "Ready, skipper. Cargo bay doors open." Morrison steadied the aircraft, flying straight and level. The most dangerous thing a bomber could do over enemy territory. Every muscle tensed, waiting for the rattle of flak, the impact of bullets. But nothing came. Just silence, and the roar of engines, and the impossible sight of a city full of starving people watching American bombers descend. "Bombs away!" Kowalski shouted, but this time the cargo wasn't death. Sacks of flour tumbled out, bursting open in white clouds. Crates of food split apart, scattering provisions across the grass like bizarre rainfall. Morrison pulled up sharply, banking to give the next plane room. Below, chaos erupted, but it was joyful chaos. People ran toward the falling food, stumbling, crying, laughing. Morrison watched an old woman fall to her knees, clutching a sack of flour to her chest like a child. A group of children, gaunt, hollow-eyed, tore open a crate of chocolate bars, their faces transforming from despair to wonder. "Mother of God," Sullivan breathed. "They're starving. Really starving." It was one thing to read intelligence reports, another to see the physical reality of mass starvation. These weren't statistics. They were human beings who'd been abandoned, blockaded, left to die by an enemy too bitter to show mercy and defeat. The formation moved to the next drop zone, Valkenburg. As Prairie Angel approached, Morrison spotted something that made his blood freeze. German troops. An entire SS platoon lined up along the road, weapons clearly visible. This was it, the betrayal, the trap. His hand moved instinctively toward the throttle, ready to pour on power and climb. But then he saw it. The soldiers weren't aiming. They were watching. Just watching. Some with faces as hard as stone, others looking away as if ashamed. One young soldier, barely 18, stood with tears running down his face. Morrison held his course. The cargo doors opened again. More food rained down. And the German soldiers did nothing. They'd been given orders, hold your fire, and against every expectation, they obeyed. Morrison didn't know if it was discipline, exhaustion, or the dawning realization that the war was truly over. He didn't care. "Valkenburg drop complete," Kowalski reported, moving to Rotterdam. The formation continued, dropping tons of supplies over city after city. And with each pass, Morrison felt something shift inside him. The hatred he'd carried for so long, the rage that had fueled him through every mission, began to crack. Not disappear, but complicate. These people weren't the enemy. They'd never been the enemy. They were the victims, same as everyone else. By the time Prairie Angel turned for home, Morrison had witnessed something he'd never forget. In Rotterdam, people spelled out "thank you" in white sheets across an entire city block. In The Hague, children waved American flags sewn from scraps. In Leiden, someone had painted a massive "God bless America" on a warehouse roof. But it was the smaller moments that broke him. An elderly man collapsed on the street, too weak to reach the food that had landed 20 feet away, until neighbors, themselves skeletal, carried him to it. A mother dividing a single chocolate bar among 5 children with the precision of a surgeon. A priest standing in the wreckage of his church, weeping openly as he watched food fall from the sky like manna. Sullivan's voice was thick. "My grandfather was Dutch, from Arnhem. He used to tell me stories about the old country, but he left before the war. If he'd stayed..." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Chen broke in, voice urgent. "Skipper, I'm picking up German radio traffic. They're reporting our positions to other units, telling them to hold fire." Morrison absorbed this. The Germans weren't just tolerating the mission. They were actively protecting it, ensuring their own troops knew not to shoot. The flight back to England was quiet. The crew was exhausted, emotionally drained in a way that combat never achieved. They'd seen the face of real suffering, and they'd seen what mercy looked like when it was desperately needed. As they crossed the English coast, Harriman's voice came over the radio. "All aircraft, this is command. First wave successful. No losses. Repeat, no losses. Dutch officials estimate 250 tons delivered. You've saved lives today, gentlemen. Be proud." The airfield erupted in cheers when they landed, but Morrison felt strangely empty. Proud, yes, but also haunted by the faces he'd seen. The children who'd probably already lost siblings to starvation. The adults who'd been forced to make impossible choices about who got to eat. The people who'd watched Allied bombs destroy their cities and German cruelty destroy their lives, caught between two forces neither of which they'd asked for. That night, in the officers' club, Morrison sat with his crew. Nobody drank much. Kowalski broke the silence. "Cap, I was wrong about it being suicide. I'm glad we did it." Morrison nodded. "Me too, Bill. Me too." Over the next 9 days, Operation Chowhound continued. American crews flew over 2,300 sorties, dropping more than 7,000 tons of food. British forces ran a parallel operation, Operation Manna. Together they kept 4 million people alive until ground forces arrived with full relief supplies. Morrison flew 7 more missions. Each one the crowds grew larger. Each one the gratitude more overwhelming. On the final mission, May 8th, VE Day, the streets were packed with celebrating Dutch civilians. The war in Europe was officially over. The Nazis had surrendered, and the people of the Netherlands had survived their darkest hour, saved not by vengeance but by compassion. As Prairie Angel touched down for the last time, Morrison realized something profound. He'd dropped hundreds of bombs on Germany. He'd killed enemy soldiers, destroyed infrastructure, contributed to the brutal arithmetic of total war. But this mission of mercy was the one he'd remember, the one that would define him. Sullivan clapped him on the shoulder. "Think they'll remember us, Skipper? The Dutch?" Morrison looked out at the rows of B-17s, their bellies empty of cargo, their crews exhausted but triumphant. "Yeah, I think they will." 75 years later, the Netherlands has never forgotten. Every year on May 4th and 5th, Liberation Day ceremonies honor the Allied forces who freed them, but a special place is reserved for Operation Chowhound and the men who flew it. Morrison returned home to Iowa, married his sweetheart Ellen, and never flew again. But he kept a worn photograph in his wallet until the day he died, a Dutch child, hollow-eyed and skeletal, clutching a chocolate bar and smiling. On the back, someone had written in careful English, "You saved my life. I will never forget." The operation raised profound questions about the nature of war and morality. How do you show mercy to an enemy that showed none? How do you separate civilians from the regime that oppressed them? How do you hold on to your humanity when surrounded by inhumanity? Morrison grappled with these questions for years. In a 1989 interview, 50 years after the war, he reflected, "We'd spent so long learning to hate, learning to destroy. Chowhound forced us to remember why we were fighting in the first place, not for revenge, not for territory, for people. For the idea that human life has value, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous, even when it's enemy life." The German soldiers who held their fire that May faced their own reckoning. Some were prosecuted for war crimes unrelated to Chowhound. Others returned to a devastated Germany, carrying the memory of the day they'd chosen mercy over fanaticism. One former SS officer, interviewed decades later, said simply, "For 5 years we'd been told Americans were monsters. Then they flew unarmed over our heads to feed people we'd been starving. It broke something in us. The lie couldn't survive that truth." The Dutch people kept their promise to remember. Cities erected monuments. Streets were renamed. School children learned the story of the Bommenwerpers, the bomber boys who dropped food instead of fire. When Morrison visited the Netherlands in 1985 for the 40th anniversary, thousands lined the streets. An elderly woman, tears streaming down her face, pressed a tulip bulb into his hand. "You gave us food," she said, "so we give you flowers. It's what we do." Operation Chowhound demonstrated something essential about American values, that strength includes restraint, that power includes compassion, and that victory means nothing if you lose your soul achieving it. In an era of total war, when cities were incinerated and millions killed, a group of bomber crews chose a different path. They chose to see the enemy not as a monolith, but as individuals. They chose to distinguish between Nazi leadership and Dutch civilians. They chose to risk their lives not to take life, but to save it. And they chose to trust that mercy, even in war's darkest hour, was not weakness, but strength. Morrison passed away in 1998, buried with full military honors in his hometown of Cedar Rapids. His obituary mentioned his 32 bombing missions over Germany, but the largest paragraph was reserved for the 9 days in May 1945 when he'd flown unarmed over Holland, dropping food to people he'd never met and would never see again. Because that, more than any bombs dropped or cities destroyed, defined what it meant to be an American soldier. Not the capacity for violence, but the capacity for mercy, not the willingness to fight, but the wisdom to know when to show compassion instead. If this story of courage and compassion moved you, subscribe for more untold tales of honor in history's darkest hours. These are the stories that remind us, war reveals who we are, but mercy defines who we can become.